The warm-up activity is focused on environmental science. Unit 3, How can biodiversity and development be sustained, is utilised, and the area of study 1 is maintaining biodiversity with a sustained effort. Prior knowledge students have explored the importance of biodiversity, understand terms about species richness, species abundance, and species diversity, and now on to investigating threats to biodiversity, human and non-human. The warm-up activity is an introduction to the issues relating to the threats of biodiversity, exploring the links between how threats can affect species diversity, species richness, and species abundance, therefore decrease biodiversity within an ecosystem. So firstly, the teacher, myself, without any information, I would show a video about the Great Barrier Reef to students, asking them to observe what they see. After the video, the teacher briefly introduces the concept of how the biodiversity of ecosystems can be susceptible to human and non-human threats, which can vary depending on the type of ecosystem it is. All of us living near these ecosystems contribute directly or indirectly, significantly or not so significantly, to the degradation of the biodiversity of an ecosystem, often without realising the relationships and impacts that humans can make. So the teacher asks the students to brainstorm the topic threats to biodiversity, firstly individually, with the teacher observing the students writing down what they know, their ideas, and then secondly get students to think, pair, share with the person next to them. Thirdly, then a whole class input with teacher writing down students' responses on the whiteboard to make sort of a mind map of the topic. Some of the possible answers could be for the threats: habitat modification and degradation of land, competition with introduced species, grazing pressure, earthquakes, tsunamis. Any answers that the student says, write them down, and then you can discuss them afterwards. So then the whole group focused teacher-centered discussion encourages the students to think about what type of threat it is. Would it affect the biodiversity of a species ecosystem? Would it affect species diversity, species richness, or species abundance? Would it affect the biodiversity of the species/ecosystem? Would the threats change in the ecosystem if it was an ocean? Like, for example, plastic pollution, water runoff from fertilizers, fishing, tourism, seeing if the students can see a difference between that there's different threats for different ecosystems. In addition to the brainstorming idea, the teacher will show a model of an ecosystem through a jar of, I've got Smarties, like here, yeah. So it's to show species richness, species abundance, which together equals species diversity. So the jar is a model of the ecosystem. And just to get the students to think about, if these threats occur, is there a difference in the biodiversity of the ecosystem in the jar, and why? What threats are visible to us? Can all potential threats to biodiversity be visible to us? And are we ourselves a threat to biodiversity of ecosystems? So basically the questions structured in the warm-up activity are open-ended, and the teacher is really being the facilitator, so to get students' input and ideas about the topic, and then if the students ask other questions and are curious, get them to think about it. But all the other examples of the questions are just there as a backup in case you need to go down a different path to think about other questions for the students to inquire about the topic. So the success criteria that I'd be looking for throughout the warm-up activity is what I would expect from the students. So that would be for students to make connections from previous classes to aid their thinking process, for students to express their ideas about threats to biodiversity, and for the students to participate and collaborate in the discussion as well. The warm-up activity is engaging because it gives an opportunity for students to reflect upon the ideas they know in relation to the threats of biodiversity through a constructivist and inquiry-based learning approach, The teacher is a facilitator for the whole class discussion by utilising open-ended questions which allow the students to share their ideas and to consider other peers' ideas as well. The video aids to start thinking about the topic through another means of understanding as well. So engagement would be identified by the following characteristics. The body language of the students, if it's positive, their interaction within the class, their student participation, if students are having a voice input, active engagement with the content discussed through open-ended questions. Are the students inquiring about the topic, asking further questions and are motivated to discuss it further? And are students curious about how the threats can impact the dynamics of biodiversity in the environment? Those are the things I'd be looking out for to see if my students were engaged.